Hello, autumn has well and truly arrived in Britain at the moment, and I wanted to take a bit of time out today and make a little video showing you how to craft an autumn wreath. We're going to be using some vine to create our wreath base, and you'll need some twine or wire, obviously a pair of scissors, and a few bits of foliage. So we've got some preserved beech here, but you could also use any dried foliages or things that will dry, like a eucalyptus, for example. And I've got some dried flowers. I've got the dried hydrangeas that you might have seen me use in some other videos, and also some dried seed pod heads. It's a nice 15-minute video to take you into the joys of autumn. First of all, we're going to start off by creating our wreath base. I've used a vine. This one's actually smilax, which we had left over from a wedding install that we did. But you could use anything like a clematis or any kind of vine, like a jasmine as well, would work really nicely. What you want to do is obviously make sure all the leaves are removed. This vine has been sat outside for a few weeks, so it's dried out a little bit. It doesn't have any leaves left, but I'm just taking off a few of those kind of bits that are sticking up there, the wispy bits. I want to keep some of them on because actually I quite like that. That makes it look a bit more wild and natural. And to start off your wreath, you want to make sure that it's reasonably pliable. You're just going to bend it into shape and hold it on the join. Hopefully you can see this on the camera. And then you're just going to weave, and you could cut it if it's quite a long piece, this one is. You're just going to start weaving it through, so winding it in and out and round, and that way, if you do that enough times, it becomes a supporting structure. You can already see that one there, hopefully against the backdrop, whoops, that it's a supporting structure. So you just carry on weaving your willow through, or vine, or whatever you've got to hand, and that way you can create a lovely natural wreath base, just like the one I've got here. This one has dried out a bit now, so this one I made about a month ago. So it's perfect for using for your autumn wreaths, but you can use it on a fresh vine base. What I would say is that the fresher the vine, the more pliable it is. So you might find that it doesn't hold its shape quite as well. You can go small. You can also go big. You can probably see just at the corner of the screen here, this was a clematis vine that we used and made into a larger wreath frame. So you're in control of your wreath size by making your own bases, which I think is always a bonus, especially if you want to go big or want to go small for inside. Now you could keep it like this if you like and just have a lovely kind of rustic decor. But today we wanted to bring a bit more of the autumn in and make a bit more of a bougie OTT wreath. And we're going to start by attaching our wire or our string to our wreath base. Just simply tie a knot, nothing fancy. We're just going to tie a little knot round. And this is going to allow us to bind the foliage and the dried flowers that we're using onto our wreath. Now, whenever we're making wreaths, you want to be going in the same direction. So everything's going to be pointing in the same direction as we go around. And you're going to be working on top of what we first put on. So if we put a bunch here, we then work on top of that bunch here. It will all become apparent when we start going, but you don't want to work underneath because that makes it really, really difficult to do. So we've attached our string, as you can see. Now this string's actually got a bit of wire in it, so it's the best of both worlds. Sometimes on a woven wreath base, then I find just having the wire can be a little bit too harsh, like it almost cuts through the base a little bit. Whereas this string here is perfect because it's a bit softer than just a wire. So we're going to start off with our foliage. So I've got some preserved beech here, which I love using at this time of year. It's preserved with some glycerine, so it will kind of hold its shape. It does drop a little bit as the seasons go on, especially because, and drop by drop I mean droop, the leaves will actually stay on the branches. But what I love about this is that it can be used out of water. So we're doing a waterless wreath today. So we're not using anything that needs any water supply. So you're going to take a little clump of foliage. Now I don't want to make my wreath base too heavy. If you've seen wreaths that we've done before, you know I love big buffy wreaths, but today this one is a bit more delicate. You could use this, you could also use bracken. If you've managed to get some bracken that's nice and dry and has dried out really nicely, that might be nice to use. So I'm just putting a clump of foliage on, and then where the foliage tucks into my wreath base, I'm just tying the string around, the string of wire, and I'm going over, catching the stems, and then through my wreath base. And I normally go around twice just to make sure it's nice and secure on there. Then we're going to do some hydrangeas. Now these are great. You could use any type of hydrangea. I mean, you could actually just do a hydrangea based wreath if you wanted to, which would look amazing. But we're going to do a couple of hydrangeas. Now, as I said, we're going to be working on top of the bunch that we've just put in, not underneath the bunch that we've just put in. So always working on top. And we want to travel around our wreath. So you can see I'm not putting it straight in next to it. I'm putting it in a few inches across. This is so that the wreath retains some delicacy, but it also means that you don't use as much product and that you can see every single bit of product that you're putting in as well. So there's our first hydrangea in there as well. Now, the good thing about the preserved beech that I've got is it's got a few different kind of tones of leaves. So you could almost make something really like a gradient to it, which would look really, really nice. And I'm trying not to waste any of the leaves. I'm literally using every single one because we don't want anything to go to waste. And then we're going to do our next bunch just on top here. And we're going to go round with our string again. And because we've woven this willow base, you can almost tuck the stems through the base a little bit, which makes it a little bit easier than using a moss base. Mostly when we teach our wreath courses, we teach on a moss base because it retains the moisture. You can get a really big buffy looking wreath using moss. It's a different look, but this one you can almost kind of thread the bits through that you're using, and that means you can add things in afterwards as well, which is always beneficial when you're kind of building a wreath from scratch. So I want to put in some seed pod heads as well. So this is from Amy, a bit like cow parsley, and really, really lovely seed head. If you wanted to, you could spray these. If you wanted to have some colour on them, you could use any kind of spray paints that you had. Would be absolutely fantastic if you wanted a bit more autumn colour in there. But actually for me, I quite like them just quite natural. It's almost like a bit more of a harvest inspired wreath. So I'm just popping a few of those seed pod heads in. Again, remembering to tie my string around. Just catching the base each time. And just pulling it, you need to pull it a bit tight. You don't want to put it really, really tight because otherwise everything kind of breaks, especially with the dried stems because they tend to be a little bit more fragile. So you want to think about the length. You obviously wouldn't necessarily put in a really long bit like this. So I'd almost just trim it down. So they're all roughly the same length. You could have a bit of variation in there, but I think it's nice that they're all kind of roughly the same length. And again, we're going to go round. We're travelling, so we're moving the foliage on each time, leaving a gap between the bunches, and then tying it on like this. Sometimes if you're on a reel wire, or if you've got a reel of string, sometimes you might need to wind it in a little bit. It gets a little bit raucous and overexcited. You could pip these hydrangeas down as well if you wanted to, and almost do something a little bit more delicate if you wanted a more delicate looking wreath. I love using their big heads as they are. And again, if you wanted to, this is something else. If you wanted to add a little bit more colour to your hydrangeas, you could actually dry these and then spray them too. I want to, as I said, I want to keep it quite natural, but that is a possibility. So you could almost like dusk them with a little bit of reds or purples if you wanted to. You could tie other things into your wreath. So you could add some berries, some like nice rose hips. You could also even use these little gourds as well, which would look quite nice. You might be able to add these in afterwards. And if you wanted to do that, you'd need to put a wire through the bottom, and then you can wire them onto your wreath, which would look really, really beautiful. I might add some of those on at the end. And you can add all sorts. You could do like a rosemary based wreath if you've got lots of rosemary that needs cutting back in the garden. This kind of project is perfect if you're kind of just cutting back all your trees and bushes and want to do a little bit of autumn decor for the door and not put anything to waste. So we're going round and round, and you can see we're kind of almost halfway round already. And a few more seed pod heads. So we want to make sure we're kind of working in an order. So we'll do some leaves, a hydrangea, and some seed pods, and repeat. But it doesn't have to be that structured if you don't want it to. It's your wreath. It can look exactly how you want it to. Some people like to have something that's a bit more asymmetrical. So for example, they might actually just go round half of their wreath. They might not have decor all the way round, which I really actually personally love the look of. I love that kind of really abundant one side and then a bit less going on in the other. And that lets the willow base really kind of shine through, which I think actually the willow base is really beautiful on its own. So it's a shame to completely cover it. But if you want to, you can continue going around or stopping whenever you're ready. And as we get nearer to the end of our wreath, you can see here, we're probably going to be able to fit kind of 2 more bunches in here. So I'll probably a foliage bunch here, and I'll probably do another hydrangea here, because otherwise it's going to feel really uneven because everything's kind of over this side. And it's just going to get a little bit more tricky to kind of tie the string around without getting everything caught in all the foliages. But the trick is just to take your time and just make sure as much of that kind of foliage is out of the way of where you're going to bind your string around. So just takes a bit of a time to just shimmy that foliage along, basically. And I think you'll agree, well, I hope you'll agree, that it's looking gorgeous already. There's a few bits where I've got some gaps, but we can always thread some more foliage and bits in afterwards. But the main idea is that the main bit of your base is attached on with your twine or your string, so that it's all nice and secured. It almost kind of melds together, almost knots together. And that way your wreath will be nice and strong and withhold any wind. Now, because this is a mainly dried wreath, this would be really suitable for something in like a covered porch or indoors. It doesn't fare so well if it's subjected to kind of weather that's constantly raining, which it has done this year, because the items are dried, and if they get wet again, then they tend to go a little bit damp and a little bit kind of mouldy. So not the look we're after. So any kind of covered porch. If you wanted something that was designed for to withstand some of the things that the weather can throw at us, then I would probably recommend doing something on a mossed base, and something that was a bit like contained more fresh stuff. So maybe like buried ivy, or the eucalyptuses that you can get at this time of year, which are all looking amazing. You could have some dried elements in there as well, but I would just be cautious because they do tend to go over when they're kind of constantly getting wet. Right, we're almost almost there. Oh my gosh, I love this already. Imagine this with just like loads of bracken in it. And like bracken and just loads of rose hips, that would also look incredible. So if you're out walking, and as I said, the bracken around here has been really damp this year. You want something that's kind of dried rather than super damp, because the damp stuff just goes a bit limp. And as I said, then goes a bit mouldy and a bit murky and mucky and smelly. But if you can get it and dry it out, if you've got like a dehumidifier at home or something like that, then bracken and just kind of loads of rose hips would also look incredible. I'm just putting my last bunch in now. If I can find the edge of my string. There we go. And as I said, this is the last bunch, so I really need to kind of wiggle my string through to make sure I've caught the edges of those stems, to make sure everything's nice and tight, and to make sure I'm not kind of pressing anything down so something doesn't look really, really flat against it. And now what we're going to do is we're going to tie off our string. So we're finished with the string. We can weave some more things into our wreath, but we don't need the string anymore. So we're going to turn it over. And this is a sewing term. We're going to do what I call a slip knot. So we make a hoop with our string that we just threaded through, and we pull it through. And then we do that again. So you go through your wreath, over the top, you make a loop, and then you pull your string through. And I tend to do that a few times so that I make sure my wreath's nice and secure. Just going to make sure everything's sitting where I want it to. And go over and do that nice slip knot as well. Now I've got obviously quite a long bit of string left. All I tend to do is just snip that off, and then just to make extra sure, I'll weave it back through where I've been going around my wreath with my string. So just weave it back through that string, just to make sure it's nice and secure and nice and tight. So there we've got the base of our wreath, our autumn wreath, just from creating that beautiful vine base. I want to add a few more seed pods through because I love seed pods. They're one of my things that I really enjoy using at this time of year. And I have got a few rose hips, so I'm also going to grab those and put some of those on as well. Now, because we've tied our string off, we can just thread these last bits in, and it's a good chance to look through for holes as well. Now, because the base is woven, as I said, you can just literally just push it through the base. I tend to give it a bit of a wiggle to make sure it's kind of staying put, but you can just thread things through and pull them to sit as you want to. Now we've got some of these rose hips. I just want to weave a few of these through because I just think it's so kind of seasonal and of the moment. And we're just going to wiggle them into our base. I want them to feel quite natural, because like they're just kind of almost growing through the base. And I don't think you need too many of them. It's just like a moment here and there. So I'm just using 2 stems, but whatever you can get really. And then you can turn the wreath round and just look at it from all the different angles. There we go. And then I'm going to show you how to put the gourds in. So for these, I've got some wires, just some wire here. And you're going to get your gourd. Now actually you probably need a bit of a thicker wire than this. I've only got a thin wire today, but a thicker wire would be better. You can see this is quite pliable. And you just push it through, all the way through till it comes out the other side, which this is where the thicker wire comes into play, because obviously the skins of the gourds are tough. So it's come out the other end here. And then we're going to do another one as well, another crosshatch. Just going to push that through. If the wire bends, it's worth just turning it over. Let's just try and get this one out the other end. There we go. Push that through. A little bit more. And then what we're going to do is we're effectively going to tie this onto our base. So because they're quite heavy, it's going to sit quite low in the base of the wreath. So what I'd recommend is that it almost sits like on the inside rather than the outside, because when it's up on the door, you notice the inside of the wreath. You want the outside to feel nice and kind of wispy. And all I'm doing to attach it is just twisting the wires together underneath. And again here, twisting the wires together. Okay. Turn it over so you can see. Twisting the wires together and then cutting them off, and then making sure, don't want any scratchy bits on our door particularly, making sure they're all tucked back in. And then that is your gourd attached in the centre of your wreath. We're almost there. There is a dried wreath base decorated with seasonal dried foliages and gourds ready for autumn.